She was desperate in front of her ex-husband until she walked up to a stranger and whispered, "Could you pretend to be my date? My ex is watching." Emberly Bishop was 28 years old and had a routine that worked like armor. Every day at 7 in the morning, she was already up. Black coffee, no sugar, and her laptop screen opened before the sun had fully risen over Chicago. Spreadsheets were her comfort zone. Numbers didn't lie, didn't betray, didn't leave in the middle of the night taking half of what she believed was love. 5 years had passed since the divorce, and she'd learned the hardest lesson. Control was the only way to survive without falling apart. But there were nights when, looking out the window of her empty apartment, she wondered if surviving was enough. That October morning, Chicago's cold cut through the skin, but Emberly barely felt it. She was too focused on the event happening in 3 days, the launch of the new luxury hotel on the shores of Lake Michigan, a project that could either catapult her career or destroy it for good. Every detail had to be perfect. The flowers, the lighting, the table arrangements, the exact shade of gold in the curtains. She'd been coordinating corporate events for 5 years, and each one was proof that she didn't need anyone to shine. Or at least, that's what she told herself every time the silence in her apartment grew too heavy. But the truth, the one she hid even from Natalie, her best friend, was that the shine was starting to feel cold. She adjusted her tight bun, an automatic gesture, almost unconscious, as she walked through the empty hotel ballroom. The glass walls reflected the city outside, skyscrapers rising like indifferent giants. Emberly saw her own reflection among them, an elegant, composed, professional woman. But behind that image, there was a girl who still trembled, remembering the day Damien walked out the door, taking with him not just his things, but also the certainty that she was enough. 5 years later, she could still hear the echo of that door slamming, and she hated admitting that somehow it still hurt. "You okay?" Natalie's voice pulled her from her trance. Emberly turned, forcing a smile she'd already perfected. "Of course, just checking to make sure everything's in order." Natalie watched her with that look of someone who knew every crack, every disguised fissure. "You always say that, but I know you, Em. I know when something's eating at you." Emberly looked away, pretending to adjust one of the already perfectly aligned chairs. Natalie was right, as always. But admitting it meant opening a door she'd locked with a padlock, chains, and a promise to never go back. So she just smiled again, one more time. Everything's under control. But not everything was. That afternoon, while reviewing the guest list, she saw the name that made her heart falter for the first time in months: Emberly Bishop and fiancé. 2 words, 6 syllables, a punch to the gut. He would be there, at the event she organized, in the place that should be her territory, with the woman he cheated on her with. Emberly felt her hands tremble, but she hid them under the table before anyone could notice. Control, always control. But something inside her, something she'd kept locked away so carefully, began to crack. And for the first time in 5 years, she didn't know if she could hold on. Night fell over Chicago, and Emberly was still in the office, surrounded by papers and the blue glow of her computer screen. Outside, the city lived. Laughter, car horns, entire lives happening, while she remained there, trapped in her own rigidity. She looked at her reflection in the window and saw what she always saw: a woman in control. But for the first time, that didn't comfort her. On the contrary, it felt like a prison. And deep down, in that place she didn't like to look, there was a timid desire, almost embarrassed, that something, anything, would break that routine and remind her there was still life inside her. But what she didn't know was that in 3 days, in front of everyone, her ex-husband would do exactly that, only in a way that would make her wish the ground would open up beneath her feet. And without knowing it, she would be seconds away from a choice that would change everything. Asking a complete stranger for help, just so she wouldn't fall apart in front of those who had already seen her broken once. The event was approaching, and with it, the first tremor of a transformation Emberly didn't yet know she was about to live through.
The night of the event arrived like a silent storm. Emberly spent hours getting ready, every gesture calculated, every detail designed to convey exactly what she needed, that she was fine, more than fine, flawless. The navy blue dress fell perfectly over her body, elegant without being flashy, powerful without screaming. She pulled her hair into a bun, not as tight as usual, because Natalie insisted she needed to look less event coordinator and more woman who moved on from her past. But when she looked in the mirror one last time before leaving, Emberly saw the truth. She was building armor. And armor exists because there's something that needs protecting, something fragile, frightened, still bleeding inside. The ballroom was breathtaking. Golden lights danced on the glass walls, Lake Michigan glittered outside like a black mirror under the moon, and the sound of the string quartet filled the air with an almost painful elegance. Emberly moved among the guests, greeting, smiling, making sure every detail was in place. It was her show, her stage, and she commanded every scene. But then he walked in, Nicolas Bishop. And beside him, in a red dress and a victorious smile, the woman who had taken Emberly's place before she even knew she'd lost the war. The world didn't stop, but it should have. Because something inside her stopped, her heart, her breath, time itself. She saw him. Of course he saw her. Damien had always had a perverse talent for sensing when she was vulnerable. He walked toward her with that smile that once made her feel special and now only made her feel small. "Emberly, you look incredible." His voice was smooth, too intimate for a man who no longer had the right to touch her, not even with words. She forced a smile, the one she'd learned to use as a shield. "Damien, I'm glad you could make it." Every syllable was a well-rehearsed lie. The fiancé beside him extended her hand, and Emberly shook it with a firmness that hurt her own fingers. "Congratulations on the event. It's beautiful." Emberly thanked her, but she didn't hear the rest, because all she could see was Damien's hand on that woman's waist exactly where hers used to be.
Natalie appeared at her side seconds later, holding 2 champagne flutes like weapons. "Breathe, Em. You're pale." Emberly took the glass and drank too quickly, feeling the liquid burn down her throat. "I'm fine." But her voice came out shaky, and Natalie wasn't stupid. "You're not, and you don't have to pretend with me." Emberly looked at her friend, and for a second, just one, she let the mask fall. "I can't stay here, Nat. I can't watch him with her, not like this, not in front of everyone." The shame was hot, corrosive, because it wasn't just about Damien. It was about all the looks around her, everyone who knew, who remembered, who saw her as the woman who wasn't enough. And that was unbearable. That's when she saw him, a tall man in an impeccable suit, standing near the window, watching the lake with a distant expression, as if he were somewhere else entirely. He seemed out of place, not because of his clothes or posture, but because of something more subtle. An elegant sadness, perhaps? Or just the exhaustion of someone who'd smiled too much out of obligation. Emberly didn't think. There was no time to think. She just walked up to him, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it wanted to escape her chest, and before courage could abandon her, she touched his arm. He turned, surprised, and she saw his eyes, gray, deep, attentive. I know this is going to sound insane," she began, her voice low and urgent, "but I need a favor. My ex-husband is here with the woman he cheated on me with, and I can't look alone. Not now, not in front of him." The man watched her for a long moment, and Emberly waited for the refusal, the pitying look, the polite excuse. But then, to her complete surprise, he smiled.
Not a mocking smile, but something genuine, almost understanding. "How long do you need me to pretend?" The question was asked with a lightness that made her breathe for the first time since Damien had entered the ballroom. "Just until the end of the night, please." He extended his arm like a gentleman from another era. "Then let's pretend really well." And when Emberly took his arm, she felt something strange and at the same time comforting. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't alone. Even if it was just an illusion, even if it only lasted a few hours, it was enough. Or at least she wanted to believe it was.
They walked through the ballroom together, and Emberly felt the looks change. No longer pity, but curiosity, surprise. Damien saw them, and for the first time that night, it was he who looked uncomfortable. The stranger guided her to the dance floor with a disconcerting confidence, and when the music began, a slow, melancholic waltz, perfect, he placed his hand on her waist with a gentleness that made her tremble. "Breathe," he whispered, echoing Natalie's words, but with a different tone, more intimate. "You're safe." And as absurd as it was, as much as he was a complete stranger, Emberly believed him. And for the first time that terrible night, she allowed the armor to crack, just a little, just enough to remember what it was like to be held by someone who didn't want to hurt her. But as they danced under the golden lights, as the world around them disappeared and all that remained was the sound of the music and the warmth of his hand on her waist, Emberly had no idea that this man wasn't just a kind stranger. He was Nicolas Hardy, the owner of the hotel, the man who, without knowing it, had just become the central piece of a story she didn't even know she was beginning to live.
The next morning arrived with an emotional hangover that no amount of coffee could cure. Emberly woke up late, which was rare, almost unacceptable in her rigid routine. But the night before had left her exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with her body and everything to do with her soul. She lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, reliving every second of that dance. His hand on her waist, the subtle scent of wood and something citrus. The way he held her, firm but gentle, as if he knew exactly the right amount of pressure to make her feel safe without suffocating her. And the worst part, the absolutely unbearable part, was that she didn't even know his name. She'd used a stranger as a shield, and now she woke up with the strange feeling that something had changed. Something small, but irreversible. Natalie called 3 times before Emberly answered. "You need to tell me everything. Who was that man? Where did you find him? And why on earth didn't you introduce me?" The flood of questions came fast, eager, and Emberly couldn't help a tired smile. "I don't know who he is, Nat. I just asked him to pretend to be my date, and he agreed." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then an incredulous laugh. "You did what?" Emberly Bishop, the woman who plans down to the color of pen she's going to use, approached a random stranger and asked him to pretend to be your boyfriend? When put that way, it sounded absurd, desperate even, but in the moment, it had seemed like the only way out. "I was desperate," Emberly admitted, her voice low, "and he was kind, incredibly kind." She spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on post-event reports, but her mind kept going back to that moment on the dance floor, the way he looked at her when she stumbled slightly, not with pity, but with a hint of a smile, almost amused. "You dance better when you stop overthinking," he'd whispered, and the observation was so accurate it made her chest tighten. How did he know? How could a complete stranger read something she hid even from herself? Emberly shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. It didn't matter. That was just one night. A necessary illusion. She'd never see him again. And that was good. Safe. Because anything beyond that would be too complicated to fit into the carefully controlled life she'd built.
But fate, or perhaps the cruel irony of the universe, had other plans. The following Monday,
Emberly was called to the main office for a meeting with the event's client, a closing meeting, nothing major. She entered the conference room with her impeccable professional posture, her organized folder, her polite smile already in place. And then he turned around. Nicolas Hardy, the owner of the hotel chain, the man who saved her the night of the event, the stranger who made her feel safe for the first time in years. He was there, in a gray suit, looking at her with the same surprised expression that surely mirrored her own. For a moment, neither of them said anything. They just looked at each other while the world around them seemed to freeze. And then he smiled, that same hint of a smile, now loaded with something new. Recognition, maybe even amusement. "Ms. Bishop," he said, his voice formal but with a touch of warmth that fooled no one. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you officially." Emberly felt her face heat up, but forced herself to maintain her composure. "Mr. Hardy, I didn't know it was you." A lie. She simply hadn't thought about who he might be. She'd been too busy trying not to fall apart. He gestured for her to sit, and the meeting began. Numbers, feedback, evaluations, all very professional. But there was something in the air, a tension that had nothing to do with contracts or timelines. It was the memory of that dance, the way he held her, the silent promise that she was safe. And now he was no longer a stranger. He was the client, the boss in a way. And that complicated absolutely everything. When the meeting ended and the others left, Nicolas asked her to stay. Emberly felt her heart race, but didn't let it show. "About the other night," he began, and she felt the ground slip away. "I wanted to say that you don't need to apologize. I understood the situation. And to be honest, it was the most genuine part of that entire night." The sincerity in his voice completely disarmed her. Emberly didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, her throat tight. He took a step forward, hands in his pockets, a casual posture that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. "I know you were pretending, but I wasn't, not completely." The words hung in the air, heavy, full of a meaning she wasn't ready to decipher. Emberly left that room with trembling legs and a racing heart. She got into the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and only when the doors closed did she allow the mask to fall. She leaned her head against the cold metal wall and closed her eyes. He wasn't pretending. What did that mean? And why, in the name of everything, did she care so much? She promised herself she would never let anyone in again, that she would never risk that pain again. But here she was, thinking about gray eyes and a dance that should never have happened. And for the first time in 5 years, Emberly Bishop realized something terrifying. Maybe, just maybe, she still had a heart capable of feeling. And if that scared her, it also awakened her in a way she didn't know if she could ignore much longer. The following weeks were a different kind of dance, more dangerous, because it happened off the floor and without music to guide them. Nicolas started showing up at the office more frequently, always with a professional excuse, reviewing proposals, discussing new events, evaluating partnerships. But Emberly wasn't naive. She saw the way he lingered a few extra seconds when their eyes met, how he found reasons to extend meetings, how he smiled that way when she let slip, unintentionally, some sharp comment about impossible deadlines or demanding clients. There was something forming between them, something she couldn't name, and that scared her precisely because of that. Because naming it would mean admitting it, and admitting it would mean risking, and risking was exactly what she'd sworn never to do again. It was Natalie who broke the silence Emberly insisted on keeping. "You're different," she said one afternoon while they were having coffee in the break room. "Different how?" Emberly tried to sound casual but failed miserably. Natalie looked at her with that knowing smile that meant there was no escape. "Different like someone who's into someone and trying to pretend they're not.
Different like someone who pulls their hair back with less force. Different like someone who's alive again. The words hit Emberly like a gentle punch, the kind that doesn't hurt but completely disarms you. She opened her mouth to deny it, but nothing came out, because maybe, just maybe, Natalie was right. And that was terrifying. The invitation came on a Thursday afternoon. Nicolas walked into her office, didn't text, didn't call, showed up in person, and the informality of it caught her off guard. "Dinner tonight?" he asked, no beating around the bush, hands in his pockets, the relaxed posture of someone who already knew the answer could be no, but was willing to risk it anyway. Emberly looked at him, at those gray eyes that seemed to see through all the layers of protection she'd built, and felt her heart falter. "I don't know if it's a good idea," but her voice came out hesitant, weak, more a question than a refusal. "I know it's not," he admitted, and the brutal honesty of the answer made her smile despite herself. "But I'd like to anyway. Just dinner. No pretending, no pressure. Just the two of us." And how could she say no to that?
The restaurant was on a rooftop overlooking Lake Michigan, and the city stretched around them like a sea of twinkling lights. Emberly felt out of place at first, trying to keep the conversation in safe territory, work, projects, the weather forecast, but Nicolas wouldn't allow it. "Tell me about you," he asked, after ordering wine and completely ignoring the menu. Not Emberly the event coordinator, the Emberly who dances when no one's watching, who pulls her hair back when she's nervous, who pretends to be fine even when she's falling apart inside. The request was so direct, so exposed, that she felt like getting up and leaving. But something kept her there. Maybe curiosity, maybe the exhaustion of pretending, maybe just the way he looked at her, as if he really wanted to know. Not out of politeness, but because it mattered. She told him, not everything, but enough. About Damien, about the betrayal, about the 3 years of marriage that turned out to be a lie when she discovered the messages on his phone. About how she spent months unable to sleep, wondering what was wrong with her, what wasn't enough. And about how she learned, painfully, to rebuild herself brick by brick until she had a functional, controlled, safe life. "And now?" Nicolas asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Now I'm afraid," she admitted, and the confession came out so raw, so true, that she felt her eyes burn. Afraid of feeling again, afraid of being hurt again, afraid that if I let someone in, I'll find out I'm still not enough. He took her hand across the table, and the touch was like an electric shock, gentle, but impossible to ignore. "You are enough, Emberly. More than enough."
The night went on between stories, laughter, and silences that weren't uncomfortable, but full of meaning. Nicolas talked about the pressure of running an empire he inherited from his father, about how sometimes he felt like he was living the life others expected of him, and not the one he really wanted. "I spent so much time building this image," he confessed, looking at the lake below, "that I forgot who I was behind it. Until that night. When you asked me to pretend, it was the first time in years I felt real." The words touched her deeply because she understood. She understood perfectly. And when they left the restaurant and walked to Navy Pier, with the cold November wind cutting through the air and the Ferris wheel lights glowing in the distance, Emberly felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten what it was like. Hope. It was there, under the lights reflected in the dark water, that Nicolas stopped and turned to her. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said, his voice firm but loaded with vulnerability. "I like you, Emberly, really. And I know that's scary. I know you have reasons to be afraid, but I'd like to try. Not something perfect, not something without risks, but something real, something worth it." Emberly looked at him, at the man who appeared as a stranger and now occupied thoughts she didn't even know she still had space to keep. And for the first time in 5 years, instead of retreating, instead of protecting herself, she took a step forward. "I'd like to try too," she whispered.
And when he kissed her, there, under the lights of Chicago, she knew she was crossing a line from which there was no return. But maybe, just maybe, there didn't need to be. Maybe moving forward was the only return that mattered. But the past, as she would soon discover, rarely accepts being left behind without a fight.
The following 2 months were like living inside a dream Emberly was afraid to wake from. She and Nicholas met whenever possible. Hidden dinners at discreet restaurants, walks along the lakefront when the city was still asleep, messages exchanged late at night that made her smile at her phone screen like a teenager. She felt light in a way she didn't recognize, as if years of weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But there was something else, something she didn't admit even to Natalie. The constant fear that this was temporary, that at any moment reality would come to collect the price of her boldness. And she was right to be afraid, because reality, when it finally arrived, came with force and didn't ask permission. The first crack appeared in an investors' meeting Nicholas didn't expect to be so hostile. Emberly wasn't present, but he told her later, his voice tense, his hands clenched into fists on her apartment table. "They know about us," he said, and the tone carried a weight she recognized immediately. The weight of someone being pressured to choose. "And they're not happy. They said it's unethical, that it compromises the company's image, that I'm mixing business with you." The last word came out with anger, not at her but at the situation, at the absurdity of having to justify something so personal, so real. Emberly felt her stomach turn. She knew. She'd always known. That this was too complicated, that the world didn't easily forgive those who defied its invisible rules. "What did you tell them?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Nicholas looked at her, and in his eyes was something between desperation and determination. "That they have nothing to do with my personal life. But..." He stopped, and the silence completed the sentence better than any words could. The second crack came on a January morning when Emberly came down from her building on her way to work and found Damien waiting at the door. He looked different, thinner, with deep circles under his eyes, stubble poorly shaved, a worn-down version of the man who once made her believe in happy endings. He was holding a bouquet of white flowers, and the gesture would have been romantic if it weren't pathetic. "Emberly," he began, his voice hoarse, almost broken. "I need to talk to you." She looked around, expecting to see the fiancé, but he was alone. "We have nothing to talk about, Damien." She tried to walk past him, but he grabbed her arm, not forcefully, but urgently. "Please, 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." And against every instinct, against all logic, she stopped. Maybe because there was still a part of her that needed answers. Or maybe just because deep down, she'd never learned to say no to him.
They sat in a nearby coffee, and Damien poured it all out. How the engagement had ended, how his business was failing, how he realized, too late, that he'd destroyed the only thing that really mattered. "I was an idiot, Em, a selfish idiot who didn't know what he had until he lost it. And I know I don't deserve it. I know I ruined everything, but I still love you. I always have, and if you give me one chance, just one, I swear I'll do it differently this time." The words were pretty, rehearsed maybe, but there were tears in his eyes. And for the first time, Emberly saw what she'd never seen before. Damien, vulnerable. Damien, broken. And something inside her, something that held 5 years of anger and pain, wavered. Not because she still loved him, that love had died the day he walked out the door, but because she remembered when he was different, or at least when she believed he was. "No," she said, and the word came out firm, final. "No, Damien, you don't love me. You love the idea of not being alone, of having someone to catch you when you fall. And I'm not that person anymore. I can't be." He tried to argue, tried to promise, but Emberly was already on her feet, purse on her shoulder, gaze distant. "I hope you find what you're looking for, but it won't be with me. Never again." She left the cafe without looking back, but the encounter left her shaken in a way she didn't expect, because there was something in Damien's vulnerability that reminded her of herself 5 years ago, and part of her, a small but insistent part, wondered if she was being cruel, if she was denying him the same chance at a fresh start that Nicolas had given her. But then she shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. It wasn't the same thing. It couldn't be. But Damien didn't give up. He started showing up, at work, at her apartment door, sending messages that ranged from pleas to veiled accusations. "Are you with him because of the money?" one message said. "Do you think he really cares about you, or are you just another distraction?" The words were poison, calculated to plant doubts where there had once been certainty. And the cruelest part was that they worked. Not completely, but enough to make Emberly question, to make her look at Nicolas during dinner and wonder just for a second if this was real or if she was just repeating the same mistakes with a different face. She hated herself for doubting. But doubt, once planted, is hard to uproot.
And then, on a cold February afternoon, everything fell apart for good. Nicolas called her to his office, and she knew, even before he spoke, that something was terribly wrong. He was standing near the window, hands in his pockets, gaze lost in the city outside. "The investors gave an ultimatum," he said, without turning around. "Either I end things with you, or they withdraw all funding. And without them, I lose half the company." Emberly felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "And what did you decide?" The question came out in a whisper because she already knew the answer, or thought she did. Nicolas finally turned around, and there were tears in his eyes. Tears he didn't try to hide. "I don't know. And it's killing me, Emberly, because I love you. I really love you. But I also have responsibilities. People who depend on me, and I—" His voice broke, and he ran his hand over his face, exhausted. "I just need time to think." Emberly nodded, because what else could she do? She left that office with trembling legs and a shattered heart, and for the first time since it all began, she allowed herself to cry. Not there, not where anyone could see, but in the office bathroom, locked in a stall, hand over her mouth to muffle the sobs. Because she'd been right from the beginning. She knew. She knew that opening herself up again meant preparing to be broken again. And now here she was, in pieces once more, proving to herself that some lessons are never really learned. And the worst part, the absolutely unbearable part, was that she couldn't blame him, because she understood. She understood the pressure, the weight of impossible choices. But understanding didn't make the pain any less. It only made it lonelier. And as she looked at her reflection in the bathroom's stained mirror, Emberly Bishop wondered if she would ever learn to stop giving herself to stories that were already doomed from the start.
The days that followed were the longest of Emberly's life. Nicolas didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up. And the silence was more deafening than any argument could be. She returned to her old routine, the one from before him, but now it felt like clothes that didn't fit anymore, too tight, suffocating. She woke up early, worked late, pretended everything was fine when Natalie looked at her with concern. But at night, when she was alone in her empty apartment, Emberly allowed the pain to come, not in waves, but like a constant tide that never fully receded. And the worst part was knowing that this time, she couldn't blame anyone but herself. She knew the risks. She knew that opening up meant exposing herself. And still she chose to believe, chose to love. And now she paid the price of that choice with every painful beat of her heart. It was Natalie who found her crying in the office bathroom on a Thursday afternoon. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside her on the cold floor and hugged her, letting Emberly fall apart in her arms without judgment, without questions. When the sobs finally subsided, Natalie spoke, her voice firm but gentle. "You know you didn't do anything wrong, right? That if he chooses the company over you, the problem isn't that you're worth too little, but that he doesn't have enough courage." Emberly shook her head, tears still streaming. "But it's so much easier to believe it's me,
Nat, that there's something wrong with me. Because if it's that, at least I can try to fix it. But if it's just bad luck, if it's just life saying I don't deserve this, then what's left for me? The question hung in the air, heavy, without an answer. Because sometimes there is no answer. Sometimes there's just the pain and the hope that it will pass. But the universe, and its infinite irony, wasn't ready to let her suffer in peace. Damien showed up again, this time more insistent, more desperate. He waited for her outside work, and when she tried to ignore him, he followed her to her car. "Emberly, please. I know I'm being a nuisance. I know you're angry, but look at me. Look at both of us. We're alone. We're hurt. We're trying to survive in a world that doesn't care what we feel. Why can't we try again? Why can't we give ourselves a second chance?" The question was so pathetic, so transparent in its desperation, that Emberly almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Because I don't love you, Damien," she replied, her voice tired, "and you don't love me. You're alone and scared, and you want me to be your lifeline. But I can't. Not again. I was already broken once by you, and I survived. I won't put myself in that position again just because you can't be alone."
The words came out harsher than she intended, but they were true. And for the first time, Emberly felt something shift inside her. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hurt, it was clarity. Because even with her heart broken over Nicolas, even doubting whether she'd ever believe in love again, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wouldn't go back, not to Damien, not to the false comfort of a dead relationship. She had grown too much, suffered too much, rebuilt herself too much to accept crumbs of affection disguised as love. And if that meant staying alone, then so be it. Because chosen solitude was infinitely better than company that diminished her. Damien looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face, defeat perhaps, or finally understanding, made him step back. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time it sounded genuine. "For everything." And then he left, and Emberly knew that this time it was final. The Damien chapter was finally, truly closed. But the Nicolas chapter remained open, bleeding, without resolution. Until, on a gray Tuesday in March, Natalie came running into Emberly's office with her phone in hand and wide eyes. "You need to see this, now." She turned the screen, and Emberly saw the notification, a press conference scheduled with Nicolas Hardy's name. Her heart raced, her hands trembled, but she clicked the link. And there he was, standing before dozens of journalists and cameras with that posture she knew so well. But there was something different now. He looked decided. "I called this press conference," Nicolas began, his firm voice echoing through the room, "because there's something I need to say publicly, something I should have said weeks ago." Emberly held her breath, eyes fixed on the screen, the entire world reduced to that moment. And then he said the words that would change everything. "I built this company with hard work, dedication, and yes, with financial support from investors who believed in my vision. But in recent months, those same investors gave me an ultimatum: end my relationship with the woman I love or lose their funding. And I spent weeks agonizing over this decision, trying to find a way to keep both, the company and love. But the truth is, there's no middle ground when it comes to integrity. So today, in front of all of you, I announced that I refuse the terms of that ultimatum. I refuse to work with people who believe they have the right to control my personal life. And if that means losing investors, then so be it. Because I met someone who taught me that there are things more important than money, more important than image, more important than fear of what others will think." He paused, his eyes shining, and Emberly felt tears running down her face without being able to stop them. "Emberly Bishop, if you're watching this, and I hope you are, I choose you. I choose us. Today, tomorrow, always." The office around Emberly exploded in screams and applause, but she barely heard it. She was running, grabbing her purse, out the door before any rational thought could stop her. Natalie shouted something about getting a cab, but Emberly was already on the stairs, taking them two at a time, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it wanted to escape her chest. She didn't know where to go, didn't know if he'd still be at the press conference or if he'd already left, but it didn't matter. She needed to find him, needed to tell him that she was choosing too, that she always had, even when she was too afraid to admit it. Chicago streets passed like blurs as she ran, people looking surprised at this woman in heels and work clothes, running as if her life depended on it. And maybe it did, because true love, she was learning, doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It demands courage. It demands movement. It demands that you run toward it, even without knowing exactly where you'll end up. She found him leaving the building where the press conference was held, surrounded by reporters and cameras, but when their eyes met through the crowd, everything else disappeared. He stopped mid-sentence, eyes wide, and then started walking, then running toward her. They met in the middle of the sidewalk, under Chicago's gray sky, with the noise of the city around them and camera flashes capturing every second. "You're crazy," Emberly said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Completely crazy." He smiled, that smile she loved, and held her face between his hands. "Crazy about you, and I don't regret it one bit." And when he kissed her, there under the city lights, under the gaze of strangers and camera lenses, Emberly Bishop finally understood that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about never being afraid or never getting hurt. It was about choosing, day after day, even when difficult, even when scary. It was about finding someone who also chose you. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just being chosen, she was choosing back. And that, she realized with a crystal clarity that made her smile against his lips, made all the difference.
6 months later, Emberly stood on the balcony of the apartment she now shared with Nicolas, watching Lake Michigan shimmer under the sunset. The city stretched around them, vibrant and alive, and she thought about how much everything had changed since that night at the event, the night she asked a stranger for help and, unknowingly, opened the door to a life she never imagined possible. Nicolas wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, and Emberly allowed herself to melt into that touch, into that quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The company survived the investor's departure, finding new partners who valued integrity as much as profit. And she, Emberly Bishop, finally learned that surrendering to love wasn't weakness, it was the bravest way to be alive. Just as she discovered that love can change everything, each of us also carries that power of transformation within ourselves. Because in the end, it's not perfect circumstances that create unforgettable stories. It's the courageous choices we make when everything seems uncertain. Emberly chose to run when she could have hidden. Nicolas chose to risk when he could have protected only what was safe. And together, they proved that true love isn't the kind that never faces obstacles, but the kind that decides every day that it's worth fighting for. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to start over and believe in love. That after pain can come healing, that after loneliness can come connection, and that the most beautiful endings are those we earn with courage and vulnerability. A broken heart isn't the end. It's just the beginning of a rebuilding that can take us to places even more beautiful than we ever dreamed. And when we finally find someone who chooses to stay, not despite our wounds, but alongside them, we understand that the wait was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every fear we faced.
If this story touched you, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." Leave your mark here. Become part of this community of people who believe it's possible to start over, that it's possible to love again, that it's possible to find light even after the deepest darkness. Every comment is an affirmation of faith in love, a reminder that we're not alone on this journey and that our stories, however different they may be, all carry the same essential truth: love is worth it. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience with each episode emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here, you'll find stories of people facing deep dilemmas, making impossible choices, and discovering that love, true, courageous, transformative, always finds a way. Hit the bell so you don't miss any episodes, because each story is a new chance to believe, to be moved, and to remember why it's worth continuing to bet on love. And this was just one of many stories that will still move you here. Because as long as there are hearts beating, as long as there are people willing to risk, to surrender, to choose love even when everything says to give up, there will always be a new story to tell. And the next one might be even more touching, even more surprising, even more yours. Until then, carry with you the certainty that love, when true, always finds a way, even if that way passes through storms, doubts, and goodbyes. Because in the end, it's precisely the journey that makes the destination so unforgettable.